The apartment door slammed open, and I froze, my lips still pressed against Julian's. Our breaths tangled in the heat of the moment. My nephew, Ethan, stood in the doorway, his wide, 14-year-old eyes locked on us. A grocery bag slipping from his hands, apples rolling across the hardwood floor. In that split second, my world tilted. Shame, fear, and a desperate need to protect collided in my chest like a car crash. I'm Marcus, 32, a graphic designer living in a cramped but cozy loft in Portland, Oregon. My life had always been a carefully curated facade. Clean lines, bold colors, and secrets tucked neatly behind the canvas of my smile. Growing up in a small, conservative town in Idaho, I'd learned early to hide who I was. My family didn't talk about feelings, let alone love that didn't fit their narrow script. So when I moved to the city a decade ago, I swore I'd build a life where I could be free. And then I met Julian. Julian, 29, was everything I wasn't. Unapologetic, vibrant, a street photographer with a laugh that could light up a room. He'd grown up in Miami, where his Cuban heritage and queer identity were worn like badges of honor, even when the world tried to tear them off. We'd been together for 8 months, and every day with him felt like rediscovering color in a world I'd only seen in grayscale. But I hadn't told my family about him. Not yet. Not when my sister, Claire, had entrusted me with watching Ethan for the weekend while she was at a work conference in Seattle. Marcus, what the hell? Ethan's voice cracked, his face a mix of confusion and something sharper. Disgust. Maybe. My stomach churned as I pulled away from Julian, whose hand lingered on my arm, steadying me. Ethan, my words caught in my throat. How do you explain love to a kid who's only ever heard it described in terms of husbands and wives? How do you undo years of silence in a single moment? Julian stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Hey, Ethan, let's take a breath. Okay? This is a lot to walk in on. Ethan's eyes darted between us, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. You're gay. The word sounded heavy, like he was testing its weight. I nodded, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might drown out the room. Yeah, I said, barely above a whisper. I am. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the apples scattered on the floor like they held the answers. I wanted to scoop him up, to tell him it was okay, that I was still the uncle who taught him how to skateboard last summer. But the way he looked at me, like I was a stranger, cut deeper than any knife. Julian squeezed my hand, grounding me. Ethan, he said gently, why don't we sit down and talk? No pressure. Just let's figure this out together. Ethan hesitated, then dropped his backpack with a thud. I need to think, he muttered, turning toward the guest room and slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed in my skull, a reminder of every fear I'd ever had about being seen. I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. Julian sat beside me, his warmth a quiet anchor. He's just a kid, he said softly. He's processing. Give him time. But time was the one thing I didn't have. Claire was due back in 2 days, and I couldn't shake the image of her face, her judgment, her disappointment, if Ethan told her what he'd seen. My sister and I had always been close, but she'd inherited our parents' rigid worldview. I'd heard her make offhand comments about those people at pride parades, her voice dripping with disdain. If she found out, would she trust me with Ethan again? Would she even let me see him? Marcus, Julian said, pulling me back to the present. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here. I looked at him, his dark eyes steady and full of love, and for a moment, I believed him. But the weight of Ethan's reaction, The fear of losing my family pressed down on me like a storm cloud. I'd spent my life running from this moment, and now it was here, staring me in the face. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, Julian's arm draped over me, listening to the hum of the city outside. Portland's lights glittered through the window, a reminder of the freedom I'd chased when I moved here. But freedom came with a cost, and I was starting to realize how high it might be. The next morning, Ethan emerged from his room, his face unreadable. He grabbed a cereal box from the kitchen and sat at the counter, avoiding my eyes. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between us, but every word felt like a landmine. "Ethan," I finally said, my voice shaky, "can we talk about yesterday?" He shrugged, spoon clinking against the bowl. "What's there to talk about? You're gay." "Whatever." The dismissal stung, but I pressed on. "It's not whatever. It's who I am. And I want you to know you can ask me anything." He looked up, his blue eyes, so much like Claire's, narrowing. "Why didn't you tell me? Or Mom? Were you just gonna hide it forever?" The question hit like a punch. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Julian, who'd been quietly sipping coffee at the table, stepped in. "Sometimes it's hard to share who you are when you're not sure how people will react," he said. "Your uncle loves you. He just needed time." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he pushed his bowl away and stood. "I'm going for a walk." "Ethan, wait." I started, but he was already out the door. I turned to Julian, panic rising. What if he tells Claire? What if he hates me? Julian pulled me into a hug, his voice steady. "He doesn't hate you. He's confused. And if he tells Claire, we'll deal with it. Together." But as I watched Ethan disappear down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully built world was about to unravel, and what happened next would change everything. The Portland streets were alive with the hum of Saturday morning, street vendors calling out, the scent of coffee and fresh pastries drifting through the air. I stood on the balcony, scanning the crowd below for Ethan's red hoodie, my heart racing with every passing minute. He'd been gone for 2 hours, and my calls went straight to voicemail. Julian joined me, handing me a mug of tea. "He's 14, Marcus. He's probably just blowing off steam at the skate park." But the skate park was empty when I checked earlier, and the knot in my stomach tightened. Ethan wasn't just any kid. He was Claire's kid, raised on her strict rules and small-town values. What if he'd run off to call her? What if he was out there, grappling with questions I wasn't ready to answer? I pulled out my phone and texted him again. "Ethan, please come back. We need to talk." No response. I cursed under my breath, hating how helpless I felt. Julian's hand found mine, his touch a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. But it wasn't enough to quiet the storm in my head. By noon, I couldn't wait anymore. "I'm going to look for him," I said, grabbing my jacket. Julian nodded, slipping on his sneakers. "I'm coming with you." We scoured the neighborhood Powell's Books, where Ethan loved to browse graphic novels, the food carts by the river, where we'd shared tacos last summer, even the arcade he'd begged me to take him to. Nothing. My mind spiraled to worst-case scenarios. Ethan lost, hurt, or worse, rejecting me for good. As we turned onto a quieter street near Laurelhurst Park, I spotted him. He was sitting on a bench, his hoodie pulled up, staring at the ground. Relief flooded me, followed by dread. What would he say? What could I say to make this right? "Ethan?" I called softly, approaching slowly. He didn't look up, but his shoulders stiffened. Julian hung back, giving us space. I sat beside Ethan, the bench creaking under my weight. For a moment we just sat there. The sounds of the park, kids laughing, dogs barking, filling the silence. "I'm sorry you found out like that," I said finally. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way." Ethan kicked at a pebble, his voice low. "Why didn't you just tell me? I'm not a baby." I swallowed hard. I was scared. Not of you, but of losing you. Your mom, your grandparents, they don't get it. They never have. He looked at me then, his eyes searching. "So you just lied? All those times we hung out, you were pretending?" "No," I said, my voice breaking. "I was never pretending with you. You're my nephew, Ethan. I love you. I didn't know how to tell you this part of me." He looked away, his jaw tight. "Mom's gonna freak out. You know that, right?" The words landed like a brick. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, I know." We sat in silence again, the weight of his words settling between us. I wanted to tell him everything. About the years I'd spent hiding, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep in Idaho, the freedom I'd found with Julian. But he was 14, and the world was already heavy enough. Julian approached, crouching in front of Ethan. "Hey man, I know this is a lot, but your uncle's one of the best people I know. And he's still the same guy who taught you how to ollie, right?" Ethan's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Yeah, I guess. Let's head back," I said, standing. "We can talk more at home." Ethan nodded, and we walked back in silence, the city buzzing around us. But the tension hadn't lifted. It was a fragile truce, and I knew it. Back at the apartment, Ethan retreated to his room again, leaving Julian and me in the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. "What if he tells Claire?" I whispered. "She'll never let me see him again." Julian sat beside me, his voice steady. "You can't control what he does, Marcus, but you can control how you show up. Be honest with him. Be honest with yourself." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing, clawing at my chest. That night, I cooked Ethan's favorite mac and cheese with extra cheddar, and we ate in near silence. But as he cleared his plate, he paused. "Marcus," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm not gonna tell Mom. Not yet." Relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. "Thank you," I said, "but I need to tell her myself. Soon." He nodded, his expression unreadable, and disappeared into his room. Julian squeezed my shoulder, his eyes full of quiet strength. "You're doing the right thing," he said. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still to come. Claire would be back tomorrow, and the truth was a storm I couldn't outrun. The morning sun filtered through the loft's windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood. I stood in the kitchen, gripping my coffee mug, dreading the sound of Claire's car pulling up. Ethan was still in his room, his door cracked open, the faint hum of music leaking out. Julian was at the table, editing photos on his laptop, his presence a quiet comfort in the chaos of my thoughts. I'd spent the night rehearsing what I'd say to Claire. "I'm gay. I've always been gay. I'm in love with Julian." But every version sounded like a confession, like I was begging for forgiveness for being who I was. And that made me angry. Not at Claire, but at myself, for all the years I'd let fear dictate my life. The doorbell buzzed, sharp and jarring. My heart lurched. "I'll get it," Julian said, standing, but I shook my head. "No, I need to do this." I opened the door to find Claire, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes tired but warm. "Hey, Marcus," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Thanks for watching Ethan. How was he?" "He was great," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. Can we talk? Alone? Her brow furrowed, but she nodded. Sure. Let me just say hi to Ethan. As she headed to his room, I glanced at Julian, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. My stomach churned, but I couldn't back out now. When Claire returned, I led her to the balcony, away from Ethan's ears. Claire, I started, my voice shaking. There's something I need to tell you. I'm gay, and I'm with someone, Julian. He's important to me. Her face froze, her eyes widening. For a moment, she didn't speak, and the silence was worse than any words. Gay, she finally said, her voice low. Since when? Always, I said, forcing myself to meet her gaze. I didn't tell you because I was scared. I didn't want to lose you or Ethan. She crossed her arms, looking out at the city. Marcus, this is a lot. I had no idea. Why didn't you trust me? The question stung because it wasn't just about trust, it was about survival. I heard the things you said growing up, I said quietly. About people like me. I didn't think you'd understand. Her eyes flashed with something. Hurt, maybe, or guilt. That was years ago. I was a kid repeating what Mom and Dad said. I'm not like that anymore. Then why do I feel like I'm on trial? The words slipped out before I could stop them. She flinched, and for a moment we just stood there, the weight of our shared history pressing down. I don't know what to say, she admitted. I need time to process this. But Ethan, does he know? I nodded, my throat tight. He walked in on me and Julian yesterday. It was a shock. Her eyes widened again, but before she could respond, Ethan's voice cut through the tension. Mom, it's fine. I'm fine. We turned to see him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression defiant. Uncle Marcus is still Uncle Marcus, and Julian's cool. You don't have to make it a big deal. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. She looked between us, her face a mix of confusion and something softer. Relief, maybe. Okay, she said finally. Okay, let's just go home, Ethan. We'll talk more later. As they packed up to leave, Ethan hugged me, his grip tight. Don't worry, he whispered. I've got your back. I smiled, my eyes stinging. Thanks, kid. After they left, Julian pulled me into his arms, his voice soft. You did it, Marcus. You were brave. But as I watched Claire's car disappear down the street, I knew this was only the beginning. Coming out wasn't a single moment. It was a journey, and I was still finding my way. Weeks passed, and life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Claire called a few times, her voice careful, like she was navigating a minefield. She didn't ask about Julian, and I didn't bring him up. Ethan, though, texted me almost daily. Memes, skate park updates, even a photo of a pride flag he'd seen downtown. Each message was a small lifeline, a reminder that I hadn't lost him. But the fear lingered. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for Claire's judgment. For the moment she'd decide I wasn't fit to be around Ethan. Julian noticed, his dark eyes catching the way my shoulders tensed. You can't keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, he said one night, as we sat on the rooftop of our building, the city sprawling below us. I know, I said, staring at the horizon. But what if she decides I'm not good enough? Julian took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. You're enough, Marcus. You always have been. His words were a balm, but they couldn't erase the years I'd spent hiding. Growing up, I'd seen what happened to people who didn't fit the mold, whispers, rejection, sometimes worse. Even in Portland, where rainbows adorned every other storefront, I carried that fear like a second skin. Then, One Saturday, Claire texted me, "Can you come to dinner tomorrow? Just you, me, and Ethan. We need to talk." My stomach dropped. I showed Julian the message, my hands trembling. What if she's going to cut me off? He squeezed my shoulder. Or what if she's trying to understand? Go. Hear her out. The next evening, I drove to Claire's house in the suburbs, a modest two-story with a tidy lawn. Ethan greeted me at the door, his grin wide. "Mom's making lasagna," he said. "It's not as good as yours, but don't tell her that." I laughed, some of the tension easing. But when Claire appeared, her smile was tight, her eyes guarded. Dinner was quiet at first, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. Then, halfway through, Claire set her fork down. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. I'm not going to lie, it's hard for me. Not because I don't love you, but because I was raised to think a certain way. And I'm trying to unlearn that." I held my breath, waiting for the but. "But," she continued, "you're my brother, and Ethan adores you. I don't want to lose that." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I don't want to lose you either." Ethan piped up, his voice bright. "Can Julian come next time? He's got some dope camera tricks to show me." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'd like to meet him. Properly." The weight I'd been carrying for weeks lifted. Not completely, but enough to let me breathe. As I drove home, the city lights blurring past, I felt something new, hope, fragile but real. Months later, I stood in the park with Julian, watching Ethan attempt a kickflip on his skateboard. The air was crisp, the first signs of fall painting the trees in hues of orange and red. Claire was there too, sitting on a bench, her laughter mingling with Ethan's as he landed the trick. Julian had become a regular at family dinners, his charm and warmth slowly winning Claire over. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, questions she didn't know how to ask. But she was trying, and that was enough. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Claire pulled me aside. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft, "I'm proud of you, for being you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." I hugged her, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. Later, on the rooftop with Julian, I looked out at the city, its lights a constellation of possibilities. "I thought I'd lose everything," I said, "but I gained so much more." Julian kissed my forehead, his voice a quiet promise. "You're not alone anymore." And as Ethan's laughter echoed from below, I knew he was right. Love, in all its messy, beautiful forms, had carried us through. It wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of a new chapter, one I was finally ready to write.